Didn't sweatshops end in the 80s? Export processing zones? What are they? Why is the name so long? Well, this week, all you have been diving into is thinking about the issues of what sweatshops are now called export processing zones. You've watched Machilopolis and you're reading an old piece by Edna Bonasich and Applebaum about the return of the sweatshop to the United States. In this video today, what we're going to be tackling is some of the big concepts that they're introducing to you in the article. But I'm also going to try to bring together the ideas around the mobility or the movement of capital and the movement and mobility of people and how those two are sort of something that goes together. They're kind of chicken and egg at a certain point. Global flexible capitalism. Let's all say it together. Global flexible capitalism. This is one of the big concepts that Bonasich and Applebaum introduce in their reading. Currently, we can call that big concept global capitalism. Some people even call it neoliberalism. In the beginning of our class, we read a short history about neoliberalism, but this sort of flexible capitalism that we are talking about in this unit on the issues of production really has to do with the main feature of flexibility. So, what is flexibility? So neoliberals and capitalists really love this idea of flexibility because it basically allows for the market and capital to grow without government interference. Capitalism sometimes might have, in its history, has restrictions from governments, but global flexible capitalism allows for corporations and capital to grow untethered or without any types of constraints, that goods can be made efficiently by a factory and be shipped to somewhere where those goods are wanted without there being so many barriers, without there being so many taxes or tariffs. Capitalists and neoliberals and owners of multinational corporations love this idea because they can get their product to the consumer quickly, efficiently, and the consumers can get all of that product all they want, um, making the profit sort of skyrocket. Flexible capitalism is something that many capitalists want to continue to have in our world right now. So some corporation owners, employers, capitalists, and I'm not talking about like the, owner of the moms and pop stores. No, I'm talking about multinational corporations that have multiple factories all over the world that are like a billion gajillion dollars rich. They often tout flexibility as good for the worker. They say the workers can develop new skills on the assembly line because they can go from one section to the assembly line to another section of the assembly line, and they can get those skills. And if they get those skills, they can probably apply it to their next job at the next factory. Really, though? Really? Is that really a benefit, though? Because for some workers, they say that flexible capitalism only increases their job insecurities because oftentimes, when you get placed from one section of the assembly line to the next, it's because you have a contract and that those subcontracts expire quickly and no one ever gets to become a permanent worker at a factory. All factory, sweatshop, and export processing zone workers are temporary workers, not like the factory union factory jobs in history where jobs are protected and wages were protected. No, export processing zones work on flexible contracts. And so for workers, they don't really see the big benefit of learning many different types of skills because they can't really hold on to those jobs. But another key factor of global flexible capitalism is the mobility part. And that part, it gets a little bit, that's where our capital and our people sort of come together. The mobility part of global flexible capitalism is a phenomenon we've all heard before. When a corporation or a factory here in the United States go offshore, they start to quote unquote outsource the work that was being done by good old Americans. And now that export processing zone, that factory is in China or it's in Mexico. The key feature of global flexible capitalism is that corporations can choose to put their factories, their assembly lines wherever they want, especially if they can cut the costs of producing that product, that shoe, that sweater, that iPhone. All of those things are very much part of global flexible capitalism. Oftentimes people think that that is a good investment in the third world or quote unquote developing countries, meaning countries that don't have a lot of um, or poorer countries. Um, and we see that when multinational corporations go to these different countries, that it also induces migration from those countries as well. We see that in Machilopolis as the documentary tracks how products are created, and it also pulls immigrants from rural areas in Mexico into those export processing zones, and then oftentimes pushes people out of the export processing zones into crossing the international border. So, what is an export processing zone? These zones offer incentives to multinational corporations to have a barrier free environment where they could get their goods created. Oftentimes, many critics of export processing zones um, criticize its presence in poorer countries by saying that, these zones skirt national laws around the environment or labor laws. It dismisses unionizing and the ability of workers to organize so that they can have or and fight for better work conditions or better wages. Still, others say that export processing zones bring in investments to middle income or poor countries. Many advocates of global flexible capitalism also say that, bringing together workers into these zones creates a workforce, and therefore that workforce could essentially lead organizing among workers, lead to union organizing that could help them raise their work conditions somewhat down the road. There are definitely a lot of things to consider, pros and cons around the the ability of capital to move. But what we do know is that when capital, right, when money moves, when corporations move, people also have to move because oftentimes it disrupts local economies, and oftentimes people from poorer countries, if they cannot sustain a job in an export processing zone, they will look towards immigrating abroad to find work somewhere else outside of their country. So here you see that global capital, global mobility really is two sides of the same coin. When multinational corporations leave or end up somewhere, it oftentimes influences and begins migration from that country. Lots of things to consider here. There's a lot of good content in Bonasich and Applebaum's piece for you to consider, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on Flipgrid this week. Until next time.